Hi, John.
Hi, Jenny. How
Good
are
to see
you?
you. I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today. I'm just really excited to talk about your work, both as an editor and as a writer and poet. So, um, you served as poetry editor for Plowshares for nearly 20 years. I believe it was 19 years. Is that right?
I think 18.
Okay,
I'm
18
not
years.
sure. I'm not sure really. I lost count.
And during that time, you also published seven collections of poetry. Is that right? Seven?
I think so. Yes.
A As well as A Movable Famine, an autobiographical novel. And you have more books on the way, which I'm
Hmm.
very much looking forward to. Um, so you also taught for many years at Emerson College after having taught at other universities around the country. Um, one of which we have in common, SMU, where my parents met.
Uh,
So I know from speaking to former students that you have made an indelible mark as a mentor. You served as an active member of the literary community, often reviewing books and publishing critical essays. In other words, you've worn many hats, right? So can you
mhm.
talk about just how different approaches to literary work inform each other? Like when editing might inform your writing, and maybe also what are the difficulties of switching from hat to hat, from top hat to Yankees ball cap to to newsboy cap, etc.
I love that. I love that question because I really hadn't done much editing before uh, DeWitt Henry asked me to be the poetry editor. I don't know if you knew how that came about.
I
Uh,
didn't know.
Well, Don Lee took a job, and he'd been there forever and done a terrific job with the magazine and been a
Mhm.
student at Emerson. But when he left, the president, Jackie Liebergott, asked DeWitt Henry, the founder of Plowshares, to step in. So he did, and he asked Margot Livesey, who was on the fiction faculty, to be the fiction editor, and asked me to be the poetry editor. So I really didn't know what was involved in that, but I soon came to love it and to be humbled by the amount of good work that over the transom all the time. In fact, one of the pleasures of it was sometimes people ask me who was in the magazine. I can't actually name the poets, but I can name the poems because
Mm,
we, and I think that's one of the things that distinguishes Pleasures from the onset was almost, I think, the issue I edited, I think uh, something like almost 70% of the contributors had not published books. So they were first
incredible.
time, they were really, and they were fantastic. So what I loved, which is what I loved about teaching, was discovering new poets. And, uh, and I wouldn't have done that if not for the structure of the magazine, which was having the readers, the first round readers, and then senior readers because the senior readers were, 28, 30 years old in the MFA program or beyond, or people who just applied to be readers, who did a fantastic job passing on work to me that I wouldn't have known. So I felt it really fed my own work in that it made me familiar with presses I wouldn't have known. Uh,
Hmm.
Ugly Duckling, yes, yes, presses like that I wouldn't have run into in bookstores because you don't see those in many places. So for me, it was a great joy.
Yeah, thank you. You just said something that's going to make me jump around a little bit, which is always kind of a fun thing. So you mentioned, how many writers and poets you published who hadn't published a book yet. So, um, one thing that I admire so much about your work as an editor and about Plowshares in general is just that the journal champions emerging writers, right? For you, I think between your mentorship of the poets at Emerson in the MFA program and beyond, but also in the journal. So I wondered if you could talk about the history of the Emerging Writers Contest at Plowshares and also the importance of publishing emerging writers.
I think that I learned very early the need for young writers to have support, and that came from my leaving Iowa when I was 24 with my MFA, or 23, whatever it was, and going to the Fine Arts Work Center in
Hmm.
Provincetown, who gave awards only to emerging writers. And that was, and then when I became director years later, I realized what a beautiful mission that was, and also how hard it was to fund that mission. Because when you're up against other organizations who can reel off the names of the writers and poets who are famed, who they support, it's very it's easier for those kind of supporters to get behind known names. But when you say our job is to place bets on people you don't know, they shy away. But over the years at the Fine Arts Work Center, I mean, it's produced, well, Louise Glick, Ann Patchett, Lucy Greeley, Michael Cunningham, Yusef Komunyaka, uh, Major Jackson. I just can't. These people. You couldn't have a book when you applied. I think that's still the case. That was dear to my heart because it meant the world to me. And also the what it gave you was a chance to be among people all at the same level. And we formed a really great community, which is still the case today. So I and I had come from Iowa, which had a real hierarchy in terms of the financial aid, which it doesn't have anymore. I understand everybody's funded there, which is just a wonderful thing. Because in my time, it was like there were teaching writing fellows and teaching assistants and research assistants, and then nothing. So it wasn't good for anybody.
Yeah.
And I was glad to learn of that change. But to support people it's a make or break point, really. And when they come out of an MFA program or never even went to an MFA program, but are starting to publish work. So I think I was always appreciative of what it gave me, and I think as an editor, I never read cover letters, for instance,
Hmm.
because I knew if I read the cover letter and it named all these famous journals, I might be inclined to say this must be good, which is, I mean, we all know there can be a bad note on a good piano. so,
Right.
so, uh, so I always read the work and say, well, who's this? And I go, I never heard of this person, but these are fantastic poems. So uh, anyway, that's part of my mission as an editor came from what I received, I think, as a young poet
Mm.
from other quarters.
It's interesting how from what the gifts you receive as a young person and also sort of the gaps that you find yourself missing as a young person so inform how you teach and edit and you know.
Yes, that's absolutely right. In other words, you can do you do the opposite of what was not good for you.
Yeah, yes, there are some ways I learned how not to edit, right?
No, I learned how not to teach.
That too.
Because yeah, no, because they were so some teachers were very harsh or dismissive of work, and instead of I mean, I always appreciated the person who could find the if it was a bad poem, find the one spot that you could expand on. In fact, I know how much you love painting, and I always love this story about Franz Klein and de Kooning, Willem, that Klein was all over the place with his work, and he was showing it one time to de Kooning, and de Kooning pointed out in the corner, he said, look at this little black slash that you have here. I wonder what would happen if you magnified that. And you know,
That's his work.
that's his work. And I always love that. I think as a teacher too, because you saw if someone saw that in you and you had a pretty much of a mess of a poem, and they saw a couple of phrases, they say, this might be the real thing here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny because the other day I was reading an interview with my close and now late friend Michael Burkhart, in
Hmm.
which he said that we had, I didn't know that, I forgot about this, that we had gone to a reading of his together, and somebody asked him about poems he read in the book Ruby for Grief. And he didn't like the question the man asked him, which was, why aren't your poems more open uh, in other books as they are in that book. And he said that I had said to him, I think that guy might be onto something. And he said he realized that was true after his initial umbrage at the question, that
Hmm.
it was a breakthrough for him. So, friends and teachers and colleagues can impart growth to each other if they leave the competitive world behind, which has always been, I think, the way of the journal and the way that I can see you and I have felt as a part of our pedagogy.
Yeah, I think we share that. David Keplinger, who I think you published in maybe the issue that the winter issue you edited, 24, 25,
Mhm.
um, was that teacher for me. That teacher who I just looked at and said, that is how I want to teach, to be that, to live and breathe poetry and just to transmit that to my students, you know? Yeah.
We're lucky to have someone like that.
So lucky.
Uh, I I was lucky by coming to Provincetown because uh, at Iowa at that time, um, I have to say that there wasn't a lot of teaching going on. Uh,
Mm.
and, and then and then can you imagine going to a place where people were reading your poems without compensation? And Alan Dugan would write long letters on legal page about my poems,
Oh,
and we'd have conferences, and same with Stanley Kunitz and Grace Paley and those
wow.
people who were doing it, out of the goodness of their hearts. Uh, we're
It's incredible.
lucky to have met people like that.
Yeah, just the legacy. It's beautiful. Yeah. Um, okay, so I kind of just mentioned this, but when Ledette Randolph retired, you stepped in as interim editor in chief. And then you also edited the winter 24-25 issue of the journal. And I'm just curious if you could talk about what you're particularly proud of in terms of your work at the journal.
Oh, I don't know if I'm how proud I am of it, but I am pleased with how it happened. But I remember when she asked me to edit that issue that I was very nervous about it because I'd seen so many of these great guest editors come through before. But I decided that not knowing fiction the way Ledette did, that I had to rely on her for that.
Mm.
And she was great. But I approached the issue the way a developer starts a mall. So I figured I'd need two big box stores, in which I got Joan Silver and Charlie Baxter. I said, look, do you have a story to lay the foundation for this issue? And Joan gave me Mercy, the title story of the book that came out the year before, and Charlie gave me that
Mm.
fantastic story too. And then Ledette, I have to say, all those other choices. She gave me a lot of stories, but uh, she vetted all those. Um, and I didn't solicit any poets. I just took what came, uh, which that I thought that was honest, and because I think the magazine has never, it's always been impartial uh, to things like that. I mean, once in a while, maybe you could see someone who you like has a book coming out, and you ask them to send some poems or something. But I didn't do that with this. I just saw that we got so much terrific work that it was hard to pare it down, in fact. And you know what I'm saying, because you have to turn away things, and a lot of them are, well, as you know, and I think it's always comforting for young poets to know that sometimes it's never a judgment on your work when you get rejected. It just means we didn't have room for it, or it didn't fit the issue, or it doesn't mean it's a bad piece. Uh, so anyway, that's the way I went around doing it. And then I had to write the introduction, which I had seen so many fantastic introductions to. Uh, but I based the introduction on the exchange that I have almost weekly with Jonathan Aaron, who was my colleague at Emerson for the whole time I was there, 25 years. And even tonight at 5 o'clock, we're going to discuss each other's poems. So we wait for each other to write poems. And it's really been a spur to me to keep going. And I mentioned in that introduction, the way that we exchanged poems was the way that I felt these poems were coming to me. I
Mm.
read them with the same care and real joy of seeing what's in the packet. So I love doing that. And but it was a lot of work. I have to say, I realized the guest editorship is a ton of work, and uh, I I loved it. But you're doing it all the time now. But you've done it for years too. So you're more used to doing that than I was. It was a surprise to me.
It's a lot of work. I've taken your lead with no solicitations, I feel like, because we get so much incredible work that you're not really expecting. And yeah, it's just and it's hard to say no because if we had 600 pages, I'd probably fill them.
Good.
Because we just get so much work from great poets. Yeah. Um, okay. We are very excited to debut the inaugural John Skoyles Prize this coming fall, which honors a poem published in the journal from the last year. So we'll be announcing that in the fall issue, but I wondered if you could talk about what you feel like are the qualities of a prize-winning poem.
Well, that's the qualities of a prize-winning poem, or the qualities of any good poem, I guess. It's by the way, I have to say thank you very much for honoring me in this way, and I'm still in shock over it, and very much humbled by it. So thank you and the staff
Thank you.
for for this great honor. Uh, well, a poem is a verbal construct. It's as Wordsworth said, you could change it, men speaking to men, or language in orbit. There's a million definitions for it, but I always think poems that I love are ones that jump right off the page. They
Mm,
speak to me right away. They also have a musical quality that is not overbearing, and they have a
mm,
surface quality uh, that is there's a fun coupling of words which you hadn't expected. So I used as my guideline for that issue edited clarity and surprise, and I like those two things. Although one of my first influences when I was a kid was John Ashbery, when he hadn't published many books, maybe two, Some Trees and The Tennis Court. Uh, so whether you could say he's clear or not is a matter of debate, but yet I love his work. It might be the opposite of clarity in some cases, but I love the wit of his work. I love the abstract quality of it. Sometimes it's imponderable, that you really can't
mm,
maybe make it out. But
mhm.
I still, lines of his, like portrait of what are the lines? My head among the blazing flocks seemed a pale and gigantic fungus. It's funny. But portrait of J.A. and a little prospect of flowers, or something like that. Portrait of J. and a little prospect. I can't remember the title, but I remember those lines. So
Mm,
it's clarity and surprise, but often I like it when I like a poem that varies from that too. So I didn't have any strictures, about what a poem should be. Uh, and I like poems that are lighthearted as well as poems that are emotionally moving. Ron Padgett, for instance, has a poem I used to use in a workshop. And in the first day, when I hand out a lot of poems I love, but it was one poem in which he just describes he's in his apartment and he's saying goodbye to his wife. And the last line is, she says, "Write a poem for me when I'm away."
mm.
And there's the poem, then
And
you
this,
read that and that's it. So I like that as I like the both ends of the spectrum, that, and then whether Auden or Yeats or
mm,
Elizabeth Bishop, or one of my favorites is Affa Weaver, who Mike Michael Weaver, because I
mhm,
remember uh, in 1996 he gave a reading at Emerson, and two poems struck me very deeply, and I asked him for copies. and he gave them to me. And then when I got the job at Emerson as poetry editor, I wrote to him and I had the two poems, which I loved. And I said, did you ever publish these? And he said, I have no recollection of these. So, so I said, well, let's have lunch. And I showed him the poems. He said, my goodness, I didn't have these. And so I think it's called Visit Number One. I can't remember what issue it's in, but it's a very moving poem.
Oh, I'll look it up.
Look it up. Yeah, it's a poem about visiting his son in prison with his father. So that's the speaker and his father visiting the speaker's son in prison.
Mm.
So I mean, I like that. I like a variety of poems, and but mainly poems uh, that have a verbal charge to them, no matter whether the heft is emotional in a deep way or in a kind of a subtle way, or even sometimes a silly way.
Yeah. You reminded me of something B.H. Fairchild, who I was lucky enough to have as a teacher. He used to say to me, a great poem is never mysterious about clarity, but always clear about mystery.
Mm. Hmm.
And
That's
I just,
true.
that rings
Yeah.
in my head. Yeah,
Well, there's
yeah.
a
Because,
difference between like a mystery and mystification. Sometimes, like
hmm
a sleight of hand, a true mystery. When you get to the end of a poem that's I think all poems, all great poems, you really don't, you really can't write a prose reduction of them. It's a foolish task. But it's not. There are poems that sometimes try to hoodwink you with a sleight of hand, and I can see that, and I can see it in my own work. When I say, you know what, this ending, I've seen this ending before in other people's poems, and I don't like it. I'm going to cross that out. It was trying to be mysterious or something, but it actually was a non sequitur of the worst sort.
I mean, that's interesting because being an editor really does, if you get some distance from your own work, you can really kind of try to approach it with that eye and say, like, wait a second, no, you're being lazy. Like, or that's like a cheap.
It's true. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's true. But sometimes I hope I don't let anything particularly cheap go by. But sometimes I say I can't get this any better. That's the way it is.
Yeah, me too. Um, okay, let's see. I would love to spend some time talking about your own creative work. So, when we were we had a poetry event at the St. Botolph Club here in Boston. Um, and you read this marvelous poem, The Beginning. It's a love poem. And it ends with the lines, I tell you I'm starting to fall, but you interrupt. Oh, and you interrupt saying, oh, and this is the next to last line and just the beginning. I just love the way the poem is aware of its own making, how it sort of compares falling in love to like the unraveling of lines. And I think you really capture the surprise that comes with this is kind of mystical thought, I guess, but the arrival of a poem. Um, so I wondered if you could talk about the challenges and the rewards of writing love poems.
That's a tough one. But that I was nervous about that ending of that poem because it was so
Really?
self-conscious. Because to mention that that you're writing a poem was nothing I really had done before, and I didn't intend to. I would
It's hard to pull off.
it worked. It just worked its way into that, and so it was a surprise to me. Um, but I'm glad you liked it because it was worrisome because it sounds, to say you're writing, uh, it anyway. It's self-conscious, and it can fall on its face. Um, well, I love poems. I do. I always like Frank O'Hara had a book called Love Poems (parentheses tentative title).
Yeah.
So, because that's kind of what they are. But well, I think I learned a lot from reading love poems, from
Mm,
reading Cavafy's love poems, for instance,
mm.
half an hour. another that's one of the great ones of his. So I've always loved them. They tend to me often to be a little plain. Sometimes the language maybe isn't as heightened as I wish it would be, because maybe I have the subject too much in mind. I'm not sure.
Mm.
Um, but I know, well, Cavafy's poems are quite plain. I read some mean critic, and maybe it was one of his colleagues, called his poems pedestals without statues.
Ooh, yikes.
And
Ouch.
that's what I love about them, though, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
are they're so bare and they're so
Mm,
plain spoken, but they're so heartfelt and beautifully
mhm,
written. Uh, so I don't know. Uh, I think love poems, they seem more born than made to me. So
mm,
they come to me. They arrive usually with a line and travel places that I never know, like to wind up in that poem, right? Talking about the writing of the poem. So it's probably not much
mm.
of an answer.
No, I maybe I have like a little bit of a follow-up, which is, do you feel like a love poem might be different than other poems in that um I'm thinking of like the uh emotions recollected in tranquility. Like is a love poem best when you're sort of in it, when you're in love, I guess. Um versus maybe another poem where you really have to grapple with something like grief or something maybe that needs more distance.
I think so. I know that sometimes some love poems come because they're poems of seduction. Because maybe you're in love, but you don't know if the person you love is in love. So you think maybe if I write a really good love poem,
I don't think I've ever tried that.
well, well, in the Plume that came out like 2 months ago or so, I have a poem called Unrequited in there, and and then Danny in that magazine, he always asks for you to write a couple of things about a few sentences about each of the poems. And I
Mhm.
only wrote one sentence about that poem, which was, if the poet's affection had been returned, this poem would not have been written.
Enough said. That's great. Well, so speaking of your new work, you have two books coming out this October. Hooray. I can't wait to read them. Your autobiographical novel, which is All the Question Marks, and your newest book of poems, That's Where You Come In. Um, so can you talk about how you move as a writer between prose and poetry? When you write
Sure.
prose, do you start with an idea for a project? Do you ever write prose to or like start with prose, discover you're writing a poem or vice versa?
No, I usually the poems either come or they don't, but I like having a prose project because I can work on it every day. I
Mm,
don't know if you've ever been in an arts colony or writers colony, but
mhm,
when I was at Yaddo years ago, I remember my next door neighbor was Malcolm Bradbury, and
mm.
I could hear his days of typewriters. I could hear his typewriter going, like it would drive me crazy because he was working and I was sitting there, fooling around with a few lines on a page, and I could hear him, you know, tossing off what I was imagining were
Yeah,
novels after novels. And, and
like his aggressive productivity.
yeah, maybe it was a tape loop, but I I used to because in prose, in fact, I could never write prose during the school year as a teacher because I had to. It takes hours at your desk, and poems. Not that they don't take hours at your desk, but you change a sentence, you change a line, you put it away. You could reach diminishing. I can myself reach diminishing returns on a poem if I stick around it too long. I have to walk
Yeah.
away. I have to show it to someone. I have to put it, away for a week or whatever. So I mean, I have a few going at a time, but with prose, I can knock it all out and then go back later, and it doesn't come easily to me. So I'm not a natural. I remember hearing that David Remnick at the New Yorker, you could like write a first draft. You would write 40,000 words in a week or whatever it was, and hardly be touched. I think, my goodness. For me, I go over it and I say, I knew the word that should have been here, but I go over it and over it and over it. But
Hmm.
the reason what happened, the reason that I began writing prose many years ago was I was writing narrative poems, and at least for me, I couldn't contain them in the line. So the lines stretched into sentences across the page, and so I needed a new genre. A lot of these poems were anecdotal. I think
Hmm.
I have to say, looking back, to their detriment, they just, you know, they were in a minor key, and because I think they needed to burst out into something else. So I think they were
Hmm.
neither fish nor fowl at that point, but I called them poems. Uh, and so I was able to, not able to, but tried to write prose. I still don't, I still, I still think, I still chop up uh, my long narratives into small sections, and that's the way I can handle it.
Yeah.
It's not doesn't come naturally to me, but that and even when you ask about the crossover, I mean, even the title, all the question marks for that novel, it comes from Tomas Transtromer's "All the question marks began singing of God's being."
Mm.
So it informs my prose. Uh, but anyway, that's how I like to juggle them back and forth. And I wasn't writing poems while I was working this book, but every once in a while a poem would come or a line would come and it would, give me something.
Oh, wow. I wondered if you could speak to the decision to publish autobiographical fiction versus memoir.
Yeah, you know, I find it hard to believe that there's such a thing as nonfiction, actually. I mean, if you and I were to recount this story and what happened today in this conversation, they'd be very different, but they'd both be true.
Yeah.
We're not liars, intentionally anyway. But, you know, so I did, I did, I need, I guess I don't have the imagination like my fiction friends to invent a whole character and a
Mm,
whole situation and a whole plot and a story. So most of the things I write they all are, they're all autobiographical and they're all fiction at the same
mm,
time because it might have the skeleton of my life, but the flesh and some of the closing words are totally false. And so it's really memoir that's dressed up.
yeah, no, I'm thinking too about, I can think of several fiction writer friends whose stories or novels I've read where I think, well, isn't that memoir? Did that happen? Um, uh,
Well,
but
you
I
see
think
that a lot. A lot of novels, when you read a novel, you can say, "This is Joe,"
exactly, exactly. Okay,
because
yeah,
that's why being with fiction writers is always dangerous because they,
yes.
well, one of my close friends always says, if I tell her a story, she says, "If you don't use that in 6 months, it's mine." So that's one thing. But the other is, you know, if there's you have a peccadillo that might be, it's good. You could see it's fodder for their cannon. Whatever that is. You see this quirk appears in some character, and you go, "Wait a minute, is that? Did I really? Is that me?" Uh, or
Yeah,
yeah,
that might be true for all of us writers. I have to show you my mug.
that's exactly it. That's it. That's very funny.
This is the perfect segue into my next question for you, which is okay. So I was reading about all the question marks, and I read a description that said that the protagonist confronts his wife's memoir, and then there's like a shadow self that interrupts the narrative. Um, and I think that one thing that we don't often talk about as writers, or maybe that I wish we talked more about, is how we are often personally involved with other writers, and we see ourselves show up in their work, right? So, like, what do you think about grappling with writing about your personal life and all the potential ramifications or risks? So, like, how do you protect yourself and protect those you love? And that could be emotionally, that could be legally, that could be personally, but while also staying true to your own truth.
That's a tough one because when I came to Emerson, there was no memoir class, and
Oh.
and I was beginning to write that Secret Frequencies, and I thought, well, and I knew they wanted it because there was personal essay, which an extended personal essay is a memoir.
Mhm.
So so I invented that class, and I overdid it. I remember because I had them read a memoir a week. It's a 12-week semester then, uh, plus handing in a chapter. It was too much. I learned. Um, but in many cases, the student would come. These were grad students would come and say, "I don't want to say this about my mother, who did this, whatever." And I remember I had a pat answer that I came to regret, which
Hmm.
was, "Well, do you want to be a good daughter or a good writer?" I thought that was very clever as a teacher. And then as years went by, I realized, well, that's not as easy as it sounds. Uh, you don't really, almost everybody I know who writes a memoir is afraid to give it to somebody,
Yeah.
right? I mean, because somebody is going to be hurt. And someone asked me how this happens. I've been guilty of that, I think, uh, without malice. And someone asked me, how did that come about? Well, I said, this is how it comes about, that you get so involved in these characters when you create them, and they might be based on different people, and then you expand their flaws or their characteristics that make them unique, and you get into that world so deeply that you forget they become more real than the human beings you based your
Mm,
work on. And so when you finish it, you're very pleased with this world you've created and the people you've created, and you've forgotten that there are people of flesh and blood who, who will read this and see themselves in it reflected in ways that are very painful. And in
mm,
some ways, I regret that. So over the years, I took back that flippant remark that I made when I thought I was teaching them well, to say, well, and I'm not saying that they should pull punches uh, when they're writing, but there might be ways of disguising or handling that in a more delicate way than reproducing the fact exactly as it happened.
yeah. The truth can hurt.
And yet, I mean, even as I just said that, I'm thinking, well, some very ugly things that can be memorable and perhaps make your book more effective.
Hmm.
I think you still there's no clear answer. I think you have to weigh it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. We're so excited to now have you as an advisory board member at Plowshares. So I'm just curious if you could talk about um, what are you excited about the future in terms of Plowshares or just literary publishing more widely, and what challenges do you anticipate in terms of literary publishing in the next few years?
Oh my goodness. Well, the reason that the magazine has survived all these years is it's very easy to put your finger on. How many years is it now? 50, 52,
55.
55?
55, yeah.
And how many editors have there been?
Um,
DeWitt,
Four.
Don, Ledette, and you, right? Four. Uh, so the continuity is fantastic. And yet the diversity is fantastic because of the guest editors. I mean, DeWitt invented a fantastic structure. So you have always somebody in place, and you do the one issue a year that the staff does, and then you never know what you're going to get when you open the magazine. And it's Annie Finch. What is Annie Finch going to have to say? What is look back at Paul Muldoon or who's ever editing it, and it's such a list of great guest editors.
Incredible. Yeah.
So so that kept the magazine. It's just it's made it so fresh and stable. I like that our magazine is real, and and mainly what I love about the physical book is I write in the first page is page 12 a phrase, page 13 a phrase. I know you can highlight this on the Kindle and they're all there, but if you were to come over to my house, I'd say, oh, look at this book, and I open it up and it'd say page 29, listen to this line. So I like the physical book. I'm glad. I'm always worried places are going to go online, and that's not the same.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all these
It
brilliant
was
answers. This is a
a
really
lot
fun
of fun. It was a
conversation.
lot of fun. Thank you.
Yes. Will you send us off with a poem?
Yes, thank you for asking me. I picked this short poem called Poem for a Summer Morning. The spider plant and Christmas cactus don't quite rejoice, yet there's an awakening at the windows and walls from the rustle of the garbage truck and overheard phone calls. We who are left in the city don't care for the sea or shore at this time of day. Just let us play in the stray ups and downs, because someone has to be around to keep the sweaty city surviving the news. We've got nothing to lose except our losses, which subtract from the sum of voices, faces, sirens, and that glum cat on his sill asking a question all cats ask, and which no one's answered yet, except to say, it's another day.
Mm, thank you
Thank,
so much, John. I
thank
love
you,
your
Jenny.
poems.
Thank
I
you.
can't
That was a
wait for
lot of
this
fun.
book.
Thank you.
Thank you.